All right, guys, one more time, I promise. We'll get through this. So, limiting factors. Limiting factors are anything in an ecosystem that prevent it from reaching its full potential of primary production, therefore limiting the amount of photosynthesis or secondary production that is done. So, there's a lot of limiting factor or limiting nutrients in different ecosystems depending on the soil structure. But a lot of times it's going to be nitrogen or phosphorus. And if you grow a garden or any flowers at home and use common fertilizers like Miracle Grow or the box fertilizer that we put on our plants here at school, they often contain these nutrients. NPK is usually what it says on the side of the bottle, and that represents the percent of nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium found in that fertilizer. So it makes sense that when we give our plants additional nutrients, then they will grow faster. Some plants will have adaptations in nature to help them in getting more of these nutrients, but if they can't be fertilized by nice AP biology students. So one of those adaptations is mutualism with nitrogen-fixing bacteria or mycorrhizae, which are fungi that live in the roots of the plants. They say up to 90% of land plants can form mycorrhizal symbioses, so that's really, really important for farmers or for anybody that gardens. This is also why that if you buy like a tree from a nursery that you're going to plant at your house, you generally want to leave the root ball around those roots. You don't shake off the dirt when you're transplanting it because that dirt could contain those symbiotic bacteria or fungi. So you want to plant the whole thing together so that they can be transplanted as a nice happy family. Many plants also release enzymes from their roots that help the soil further break down so that they can access things like calcium is another really important limiting nutrient that's especially important for garden vegetables like tomatoes. They actually say you should crush eggshells and plant them with your tomatoes so that they can get enough calcium from the environment. So all of this was dealing with primary production, which is the amount of energy that plants can take in and turn into biomass. Secondary production is what we are measuring with our caterpillars. Generally speaking, energy transfer between trophic levels is only about 10% efficient. And just like primary production, this can be measured by looking at the energy stored in biomass and then dividing it by the amount of primary production. So, for example, when a caterpillar feeds on a leaf, 17% of the energy is stored as the biomass. And these are the exact calculations that we will be making with our caterpillars. As we measure our caterpillars over the past week or two, we are measuring their growth or their biomass. Biomass, of course, is just mass that is living. We're also measuring how much is excreted as feces, how much is, we measure their biomass and their feces, and we also measure how much they eat. So we're assuming that everything that is eaten but is not put into the caterpillar or expelled as feces is going to be lost through cellular respiration. So that is the energy that's burned and the calories that are not available for some creature that may eat your caterpillar. So by measuring the living mass, we can generate an efficiency, an estimation of efficiency. Remember that not all organisms are equally efficient. Our caterpillars are very, very efficient. They are small and they are cold-blooded, so they don't waste a lot of energy keeping themselves warm. As a general rule of thumb, the larger an organism is, the higher its efficiency per unit of mass. But ectotherms have much higher efficiency per unit of mass. So if we look at some comparisons here, a mouse is going to be much less efficient than an elephant because the elephant is much bigger. They're both warm-blooded. So if we were going to compare their efficiency per unit of mass, the elephant is easier to sustain than the mouse. Of course, the mouse is much, much smaller, so it's not going to use as much total energy, but the amount of energy per gram or per kilogram is going to be a lot higher than it would be for the elephant. If we're looking at two cold-blooded creatures, the larger creature, again, is going to be more efficient, but these are both going to be much more efficient than our two warm-blooded creatures. So if we were going to rank these 1, 2, 3, 4, the shark, because it's large and cold-blooded, will have the greatest efficiency, followed by this little gecko, followed by the elephant, followed by the mouse. So a lot of these are have evolved over time. So elephants, for example, have evolved very efficient digestive systems so that they can digest grass because that's what's most available in their ecosystem. So birds and mammals have very, very low efficiencies, including ourselves as humans, in the range of 1 to 3%. So we said the average is 10. So insects and microorganisms can have trophic efficiencies of 40% or more, especially really, really large ones like a snail or our caterpillars. They're actually pretty large when it comes to invertebrates. And this is basically because they don't have to spend energy keeping themselves warm. So trophic efficiency is the measure of the energy that is passed on to the next generation. We've mentioned a few times that on average it's about 10%. And remember that it's multiplied over the course of a food web. So by the time you get to the tertiary level of consumer, only 1/10 of 1% of the original energy assimilated by the plants is still available. And this is why oftentimes in ecosystems you have lots of plants, a few primary consumers, even fewer secondary, and maybe only one or one family of tertiary consumers because there's simply not enough energy left by the time you get to the top of that pyramid. So another really interesting visualization is to measure the standing crop or to measure the biomass of an organism. So instead of looking at the joules or the energy that is allowed, we actually take the mass of the living organisms in there. We see the same pattern though. It doesn't really matter if you're measuring energy or biomass or even the number of organisms in most ecosystems. It's going to have a steep drop for every trophic level. Anywhere from 5 to 10% is passed on. Occasionally, there are some aquatic ecosystems or some really unique ecosystems, like a single large tree that can house an entire population of primary consumers, for example, like a whole bunch of bugs living on one tree. That would be an example of a pyramid of numbers where you may see more consumers than producers. But generally, that pyramid shape is pretty accurate, pretty effective at estimating how energy changes, how biomass changes, and how the population of organisms within each trophic level will decrease as you go up that food web. So this is a really interesting kind of thought experiment, and this idea that energy decreases as you go up the food pyramid has encouraged a lot of ecologically minded humans to start eating lower on the pyramid. So if you think about your diet over the course of a day or a week, you probably consume quite a few plants and then quite a few animals that eat plants. So if you're going to compare a kilogram of plant matter to a kilogram of animal matter, that animal matter takes significantly more resources to generate because it's only 10%. It takes 10 times more plant biomass to create the same amount of animal biomass. However, there are different nutrients available. I'm not saying that you should all become vegetarians. That's not what I'm saying. Our family eats tons of meat. But eating meat is a relatively inefficient way to gain calories. It does contain high amounts of nutrients, especially things like iron and protein. But if people ate less meat, it would be ecologically friendlier for Earth. So it's really, really interesting that even reducing the number of meat-containing meals per week could have an impact on our global ecosystem. But just remember that we have to be able to replace those micronutrients like iron and, of course, the protein content. So many other cultures have kind of embraced this meat-free, meatless Mondays or something. That's what we do at our house usually, is we try to have meatless Mondays so that we are having at least one meal a week where we do not have meat as kind of the main entree, I guess, if you could say. All right, so our last topic here is the processes that connect all of these. So remember that the big idea in ecology is that everything is connected. Life depends on recycling these chemical elements, and decomposers are really the link between soil and the ecosystem. Anything that is dead or waste material, like feces from animals or leaf litter from plants, will have to be decomposed in order to retain the soil nutrients necessary for ecosystems to continue. So nutrient cycles are called biogeochemical cycles because they will go through living things and the earth. and they hold essential chemicals like carbon, oxygen, sulfur, and nitrogen. And remember that each step can be driven by biological processes like photosynthesis and cell respiration, or it can be purely physical, like erosion and precipitation are a really effective way for water to move. So case studies have shown that habitat destruction can be very detrimental to nutrient cycling. Without grass or forests or whatever the plants are to hold the soil down, erosion can completely deplete an entire ecosystem of nutrients. Once those nutrients are lost, they're gone for a very, very long time. The regrowth of soil is about a centimeter every 10 years. So very, very slow. And so we have to protect soil and protect these forests as if they are the really precious resource that they are. So restoration ecology is the last little bit. We're not going to talk a ton about it in our notes. There's some really interesting case studies that you can read through, and it really comes down to two strategies. Bioremediation is repairing an ecosystem, and augmentation is adding to an ecosystem. So here you can see restoration of a wetland that used to be an open pit mine, and it's a beautiful, lush, very productive ecosystem after that. So this was a good example of bioremediation where you plant specific organisms in order to detoxify and reestablish healthy ecosystems. Sunflowers are actually really, really good at soaking up lead, so much so that the lead can be harvested from the seeds. Obviously, you can't eat the sunflower seeds if they're full of lead, but they can take it out and harvest it later. They also use different types of prokaryotes to help decontaminate water. And last but not least, biological augmentation is when we add new organisms to help fix ecosystems.